Florida, long hailed as a symbol of sunshine, beaches, and the American dream, holds a darker truth beneath its glimmering surface. When night falls, the dream shatters into a haunting reality. Makeshift tents crowd beneath palm trees, hollow eyes stare from the shadows, and families torn apart by storms drift with no place to go.
Anywhere.
Really?
Been wherever I can lay my head to sleep, I'm comfortable. But it's like nobody will allow me to take a nap.
This is the unfiltered face of Florida, a state split in two, where dazzling luxury collides with unbearable despair. And the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, can no longer be ignored. The homelessness crisis in Florida is a stark reminder that, for too many, the dream is out of reach. According to the 2024 point-in-time count, more than 28,000 people across Florida experience homelessness on any given night. These are not just numbers. They are families forced to live in cars, workers struggling to survive on low-wage jobs, and individuals pushed to camp in parks or on sidewalks. In Miami-Dade County, the problem is glaringly evident, with entire streets lined with tents and makeshift homes just blocks away from multi-million-dollar luxury condominiums. Florida's weather, often seen as a blessing, only amplifies the crisis. While the warm climate allows people to survive outdoors year-round, something not possible in colder states, this same climate attracts individuals from across the nation, searching for a less brutal environment. The irony is undeniable. The very thing that makes Florida an attractive destination for tourists becomes a lifeline for people escaping homelessness in other parts of the country. However, this influx only increases the visibility and density of encampments, further stretching local resources and services. But the problem extends beyond urban centers. Suburban counties like Broward and Orange are seeing rising numbers of individuals and families who, after being priced out of the rental market, now sleep in their cars or crowd into shelters. In more rural areas, homelessness is often hidden, with people forced to couch surf with family or live in dilapidated trailers, far removed from public attention. Why should this matter to the broader American audience? Because Florida's crisis is not an isolated issue. It reflects the nationwide housing affordability and inequality problems. Cities like Miami, Orlando, and Tampa echo the struggles of larger metropolitan areas like Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago. The homelessness crisis in America isn't confined to specific cities or states. It's a growing epidemic that transcends borders. So, what does this mean for Florida's image and its future? And how much longer can we ignore the reality of homelessness in the Sunshine State? When we talk about homelessness in Florida, we can't ignore the catastrophic role that addiction plays. Over the past decade, the opioid crisis has devastated communities across the U.S. But Florida has become ground zero for a deadly combination of fentanyl and methamphetamine.
It's mainly just heroin and meth, what they call ice or shake and bake and dog food. And I got hooked on meth to begin with. I started smoking meth. I loved it. It made me feel awake.
These drugs are cheap, potent, and disturbingly easy to acquire. In cities like Miami, Tampa, and Orlando, Fentanyl overdoses are now a routine tragedy, a reflection of the broader opioid epidemic ravaging not just Florida, but the entire nation. For many people living on the streets, drugs become a painful escape, a way to numb the unrelenting struggle of survival.
I said the same thing. I never used a needle and wound up doing it anyway. Almost 3 years clean and free from the treadmill of addiction.
But this so-called relief often leads to a downward spiral. A person loses their home, seeks comfort in substances, and then becomes trapped in a cycle where addiction makes it nearly impossible to find work, secure stable housing, or get back on their feet. The result? Repeated trips to emergency rooms, jail time, or just being pushed further to the margins of society. Florida's emergency rooms are overwhelmed with overdose cases, and shelters, already stretched thin, often cannot provide adequate care for those battling addiction. Addiction doesn't just harm the individual, it disrupts entire communities. Encampments ravaged by drugs often become dangerous, with escalating violence and crime, further isolating the homeless from the help they need. This leads to public resentment, with many viewing homelessness through the narrow lens of drug abuse and criminality, rather than understanding it as a broader issue of poverty and inequality. But here's the question. Can we realistically expect individuals to rebuild their lives without addressing the powerful chains of addiction that bind them? Without tackling the drug crisis, Florida's homeless population will only continue to rise. While addiction isn't the root cause of homelessness, it undoubtedly accelerates and deepens the problem. Ultimately, the storm of addiction has intensified Florida's crisis, making it more visible and more urgent. How long can we keep turning a blind eye to this? How much longer before the crisis spills over in a way that we can't ignore? While addiction is a major factor in Florida's homelessness crisis, it's far from the root cause. At the heart of this issue lies a series of structural problems, most notably the state's housing crisis. Florida's real estate market has boomed over the last decade, largely driven by tourism, retirees, and out-of-state investors. Luxury condos are sprouting up in Miami, and upscale developments stretch along the coast. But instead of creating affordable housing, this surge has pushed the cost of living through the roof. Homes and apartments have become commodities, bought up by investors or turned into vacation properties, leaving working-class families struggling to find anything they can afford. For teachers, service workers, and even some professionals, the gap between their wages and the rising rent is widening every year. Many find themselves living paycheck to paycheck, constantly on the edge of eviction or forced into subpar living conditions. This trend isn't unique to big cities. Suburbs like Broward County and Orange County are seeing their own versions of the crisis as housing prices skyrocket, making it nearly impossible for families to stay in the neighborhoods they've lived in for years. Moreover, Florida's economy heavily depends on tourism and low-wage service jobs. While tourism brings in billions, it doesn't provide a livable wage for most workers. Hotel staff, theme park employees, and restaurant workers often face grueling shifts for little pay, and many struggle to secure housing close to their jobs when unexpected circumstances, like medical bills or job loss, hit. They can quickly fall into homelessness. Adding fuel to the fire are natural disasters. Hurricanes and flooding devastate homes year after year. Without insurance or savings, many families cannot afford to rebuild, leaving them without shelter. This only deepens the problem, showing just how fragile the housing system really is. Government policies have failed to address the scale of the crisis. Federal housing programs are underfunded, and state-level initiatives have been inconsistent. Local governments, dealing with tight budgets, often focus on hiding the problem rather than solving it. Long-term investments in affordable housing remain far behind. So, how long can a state prioritize luxury condos and tourism revenue while its residents sleep on the streets? And what does this say about the bigger picture of homelessness in America? The answer is clear. If the system continues to favor profit over people, the crisis will only grow, leaving more and more individuals and families without a safe, stable place to call home. Florida's homelessness crisis extends far beyond the lives of those directly experiencing it. It affects communities, businesses, and the broader social fabric. When thousands of people are left without stable housing, the ripple effects spread across neighborhoods and cities. One of the most immediate consequences is the strain on public safety and health systems. Emergency rooms in Miami, Tampa, and Orlando often serve as frontline responders, treating overdoses, untreated chronic illnesses, or injuries sustained by people living on the streets. This comes at a staggering cost, as emergency care is far more expensive than preventive treatment. In turn, taxpayers bear the financial burden, even while systemic solutions remain underfunded. Public safety is also a pressing concern. As encampments grow, complaints from nearby residents and businesses multiply. Shop owners worry about declining customer traffic, while families express fear about walking past large clusters of tents. In some cases, visible drug use and petty crime heighten tensions, leading to calls for heavier policing. Yet policing alone cannot solve homelessness. It often simply shifts people from one location to another without addressing their underlying needs. The cultural consequences are equally significant. Florida markets itself as a global tourist destination, yet the presence of visible homelessness challenges this carefully curated image. For visitors expecting luxury and relaxation, encountering encampments in the middle of entertainment districts creates discomfort and dissonance. As a result, local governments frequently prioritize cosmetic cleanup operations before major events. But does hiding the problem truly resolve it, or does it merely bury the truth under temporary fixes? In a deeper sense, homelessness erodes social trust. When citizens see neighbors, veterans, or families cast aside, faith in institutions weakens. People begin to question whether the American system is truly capable of protecting its most vulnerable. This erosion of trust has political consequences, fueling polarization and frustration with government at all levels. The reality is clear. The homeless crisis is not just an isolated humanitarian issue. It reverberates through Florida's economy, reputation, and social cohesion. And when we step back, it becomes undeniable that what Florida is experiencing is simply another facet of the broader story of homelessness in America, a crisis that impacts not only individuals, but the nation's sense of identity itself. While statistics give us an idea of the scale of Florida's homeless crisis, they can't capture the real human cost. Every number represents a person, a mother, a veteran, a child, each with their own story of hardship, resilience, and loss. To truly understand what's happening in Florida, we need to listen to these stories. Take Carlos, a former factory worker in Miami. After losing his job during the pandemic, Carlos struggled to find work in a city where living costs are soaring. With mounting bills and no savings, he lost his apartment and ended up sleeping in his car. It's not just losing your home, it's losing your dignity, Carlos says. For him, homelessness wasn't a choice. It was a consequence of economic forces beyond his control. His story is all too common, as many working-class Floridians face this growing gap between wages and living expenses. Then there's Sarah, a mother of 3 from Orlando, whose life was turned upside down after Hurricane Dorian destroyed her rental home. Struggling to make ends meet with her job at a local restaurant, she couldn't keep up with the rising rent and eventually ended up living in a cramped shelter. For Sarah, the hardest part wasn't just the loss of her home, it was the anxiety of seeing her children suffer. I never thought I'd be in this situation, she says. But when a storm hits, you're just one disaster away from losing everything. Her story is a powerful reminder of how quickly families can slip into homelessness when disaster strikes. In Tampa, Tom, a young man in his early 20s, was living on the streets after his battle with addiction spiraled out of control. He found himself on a path of recovery when he was connected to a local nonprofit offering both housing and support services. Today, Tom has turned his life around, and he now shares his journey with others, reminding them that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for a fresh start. These stories show that homelessness is not just a matter of personal failure, it's a result of systemic issues like job loss, economic instability, and natural disasters. Homelessness affects veterans, parents, young adults, and entire families. So here's the question. Are we ready to see homelessness for what it truly is, a crisis that requires empathy and action, not just statistics? Florida has not turned a blind eye to its homelessness crisis. Across the state, local governments, nonprofits, and faith-based organizations are working tirelessly to provide shelter, food, and support. Programs like Housing First, which prioritize getting people into permanent housing before addressing other challenges, have shown promising results. Residents placed in supportive housing often experience better stability, higher employment rates, and improved health outcomes compared to those stuck in shelters or living on the streets. Yet, despite these successes, the scale of the problem far outpaces the resources available. Waiting lists for Housing First programs stretch for months, leaving thousands of vulnerable people still exposed to harsh conditions on sidewalks, in tents, or in cars. Traditional shelters, while critical, also face hurdles, overcrowding, rigid rules, and a lack of privacy discourage many from using them. Families may be separated, and individuals struggling with substance use often find it impossible to comply with strict shelter regulations, leaving them no choice but to remain outdoors. Nonprofits and religious organizations fill the gaps with food drives, hygiene kits, and street outreach. However, most operate on tight budgets and rely heavily on volunteers, meaning their reach is limited. The fragmented system forces many to navigate a confusing maze of providers, increasing the risk of falling through the cracks. Innovative solutions like tiny home villages and rapid rehousing programs demonstrate creativity and compassion, but they can only house a fraction of those in need. Political divides add another layer of complexity. Some residents push for compassionate solutions, while others demand stricter enforcement to remove encampments. Policymakers often respond with temporary measures rather than comprehensive reforms, leaving the structural issues largely unaddressed. The reality is clear. Florida's struggle mirrors the national landscape. Small victories are overshadowed by overwhelmed programs and chronic underinvestment. So, the question remains, how can communities scale solutions fast enough to meet demand? And are we willing, as a society, to invest in lasting change rather than temporary fixes? The time for bold, comprehensive action is now. Only through sustained commitment and collaboration can we begin to solve the homelessness crisis once and for all. Addressing Florida's homelessness crisis will take more than temporary fixes. It demands bold, long-term strategies. Incremental steps may provide short-term relief, but lasting change requires structural reforms that tackle the root causes. First, the state must dramatically increase affordable housing. This isn't just about building new apartments. It's about preserving existing affordable units and preventing them from being converted into luxury condos. Tools like inclusionary zoning, rent stabilization policies, and public-private partnerships could help low and moderate income families stay in their communities, rather than being pushed to the margins. Ensuring that more affordable housing is developed and kept in place is a foundational step to ending homelessness. Second, healthcare investment, particularly in mental health and addiction treatment, is critical. While homelessness is not solely a health issue, addiction and untreated mental illness often intersect with housing instability. Comprehensive programs that combine housing with counseling, treatment, and preventive care offer the best chance for people to regain stability. Expanding access to Medicaid and funding community clinics can directly protect those most vulnerable, providing them with the tools they need to rebuild their lives. Third, disaster resilience must be part of housing policy. Hurricanes and flooding, both of which are becoming more frequent and severe due to climate change, regularly displace families. Strengthening infrastructure, creating emergency housing options, and ensuring equitable recovery resources are essential to prevent each storm from creating new waves of homelessness. Climate change should no longer be treated as a separate issue. It must be integrated into every conversation about housing policy and resilience. Finally, Florida needs a cultural shift. Homelessness is often misperceived as a personal failure rather than a systemic problem. Society must recognize it as a shared responsibility. Collaboration between state agencies, nonprofits, and local governments is essential to building a coordinated, well-funded network of services that prevent people from falling through the cracks. The question is urgent. Will Florida continue to prioritize luxury developments and tourism, or will it invest in its people? What kind of state do we want to leave for the next generation? One of growing wealth gaps and visible encampments, or one where everyone has a chance to rebuild and thrive? Conclusion: Florida's homelessness crisis is not an isolated tragedy. It is a microcosm of a larger national emergency. Behind the palm trees and sunshine lies a reality that cannot be ignored. Thousands living without shelter, caught between addiction, economic forces, and natural disasters. Solutions exist: affordable housing, healthcare, and systemic reform, but they demand courage and compassion. To look away is to accept failure, not only in Florida, but across the United States. In the end, the question remains, will we allow this crisis to define us, or will we choose to redefine what it means to care for one another?